My name is Max Smith. I'm a career development fellow in French here at Queen's. I teach the modern papers, so literature after 1800 in French. So Paris is an interesting city because depending on whom you ask, it's either one of the dirtiest cities in the world with filthy pavements, rats in the metro, waste management services that are always on strike, or it's a sterile city, a museum city, or a kind of massive duty-free zone that's lost the blue-collar edginess that made it a site for artistic and political revolution in the past. So I started this book with the goal of examining that tension. I wanted to ask what it is that makes us view a certain place or practice as clean or healthy, why we value cleanliness and order in our cities, and what the problems with the pursuit of those things are. My book eventually coalesced around this figure of the parasite. And in French, this word is interesting because it means noise or static or information loss. So for instance, static on a radio is called a parasite. And so it allowed me to talk about how questions of communication and clarity and noise intersect with these questions of hygiene. And I call that convergence anti-parasitic urbanism. It's an urbanism that seeks to eliminate parasites in all senses of the word. These questions are particularly important right now because the Paris municipal government has taken on a leading role in the global movement for cleaner cities. That's involved campaigns against noise pollution and air pollution and promises to eliminate waste from the city. And it's also involved an embrace of smart city urbanism, so the use of technology to monitor space and using technology for surveillance to improve the efficiency of the urban machine. I don't have a problem with greener cities, but I do think there's a problem with an anti-parasitic approach to environmentalism. There's another kind of parasite that is present throughout my book, and that's a parasite in the original meaning. A poor person allowed to eat at a rich person's feast, or an unwelcome guest. And I wanted to draw attention to the people who are marginalized and who suffer as a consequence of anti-parasitic urbanism. I wanted to show the human cost, the political cost, and the ecological cost of our drive to sanitize cities. My field of research is the intersection of technology and French culture. And in recent years, there's been more and more overlap between urban studies and technology and media studies. And that's because cities are increasingly technological spaces. When you walk down the street, you encounter a number of screens and computers, either on the sides of buildings or in your pocket that you use to navigate space. And urbanists and architects increasingly rely on technological models and paradigms when they're theorizing and designing cities. At the same time, there's been more and more interest among technology researchers in the overlap between technology and biology, and in particular in our tendency to use the language of disease to metaphorize the breakdown of technology. So I mentioned that parasite works this way in French. In English, we could think of noise, which comes from the same root as nausea, or the computer virus is an obvious example. And so what my book does is it brings these two areas of research together for the first time. And what I'm trying to do with this book is push back against this tendency to think of cities like computers, to think of the city like a machine that can be perfected with enough quality control. I'm really defending the value of cities that you can get lost in. And I'm not the only one doing that, but I'm hoping that this book will be part of a broader backlash against this technocratic and informatic version of urbanism. As I said, my background is in French literature and culture, and there's also a lot in this book for people working in those domains. I discuss works of literature that are set in Paris, films set in Paris, and I also have extensive discussions of street art, graffiti, which are increasingly important artistic movements that haven't really attracted a lot of scholarship yet. French is a very heterogeneous field, but one debate that I find particularly interesting is how we incorporate new technologies into a field that has traditionally been focused on print literature. So that can take different forms. For some people, it means using algorithms and computer programs to study texts in new ways. It can mean digitizing medieval manuscripts to make them available to more people, or even using computer scanners to read fragile text without damaging them. But it also means extending our research to include digital culture alongside novels and fiction and poetry as an area of study. So my next book that I'm planning right now is on how new technologies are affecting the theater. And in France right now, you have some directors who are putting lots of cameras and screens on stage, creating a spectacle that's kind of somewhere in between theater and cinema and virtual reality. And then you have other people who say, you know, we have screens everywhere in our lives. We spend all day looking at screens. Shouldn't the theater be a place where we get away from screens, experience face-to-face live art? And as you can imagine, this debate has become even more existential in the past year when so many theaters have only been able to share their work online. And what I find interesting about this question is that on the one hand, it's a very contemporary issue, but viewed from another angle, this is a very old debate. It's a debate about authenticity and artifice, about masks and painted backdrops. It's a debate about the actor's body and the audience's attention span. So knowledge about the history of the art form is still as important as it's ever been, but the technology is introducing new terms to the debate that actually make you reconsider what the limits of the art form actually are. What I like most about Queens. I mean, my immediate answer is the meals, and not just because of the food, but because people here are as friendly as it says on the brochure. But I think I've been teaching this year. Previously, I was at Princeton. I taught French grammar and language at Princeton for 6 years. And my class was basically the last French class that my students took in their lives. It was the end of the language requirement. And I stayed in touch with some of those students, but really my class was a very small part of their college experience. And in contrast, our first years right now in French, I read the summer work they handed in at the Porter's Lodge when they arrived this year, and I will help them revise their exams in 3 years. And being able to accompany them through this stage in their lives and to work so closely with them is a really unique privilege, and I'm really grateful for that.